In 1971, Dr. Edgar Mitchell made a successful journey to the moon and back. As dramatic as this achievement was, something even more incredible happened to him on his way home to Earth.
Something that would change him forever. The courageous explorer of outer space became the pioneering explorer of inner space. Let's find out what changed Dr. Mitchell so profoundly.
I'm Michael Mannion.
I'm Trish Corbett. Welcome to Mindshift.
Our guest today is Apollo 14 astronaut Dr. Edgar Mitchell. Dr. Mitchell received his doctorate in astronautics and aeronautics from MIT. He's the author of Psychic Exploration and also The Way of the Explorer. In 1973, Dr. Mitchell founded the Institute for Noetic Sciences, and Dr. Mitchell, we're so happy to have you as our guest today.
Thank you, Chris.
Yes, and Dr. Mitchell, we understand that you have been nominated for the Nobel Prize.
Well, thank you. Yes, I was nominated, and
Yes.
it's very nice.
Yes, I should
And
say.
especially it was for your work in noetic sciences. And I think that shows that progress has been made.
Yes, we were pretty much alone 35 years ago when we started all of this.
Edgar, I know that your moon trip was an astounding event, and we could easily spend a lot of time talking about that, but I would like to focus to begin with on what happened to you on that trip that was so startling. But I know that you might need to let us know what led up to it and so on. But could you tell us about that?
Yes, we'd left the moon. We're on the way home. And my job primarily was with lunar surface activities and the lunar spacecraft to go down to the surface and come back. So when we were on the way home, largely my primary job had been completed, and we were coming home on a well-functioning spacecraft. We still had experiments to do, etc., but it was much more relaxed. And in addition to that, we were rotating every 2 minutes to keep a thermal balance on the spacecraft. It's called the barbecue mode, for example.
So it was like a barbecue pit.
Spin,
Okay.
right. But what that caused to happen was that the Earth, the Moon, the Sun, and the 360-degree panorama of the stars and the galaxies and the galactic clusters were there, visible. In space, the stars and everything are 10 times brighter. There's an order of magnitude more visibility due to the lack of intervening atmosphere. Mm-hmm. So that sight is utterly overwhelming. And what happened was I was looking at that, and I realized from my science training that I was thinking about the molecules of my body and the molecules of my spacecraft and my partners were manufactured in some ancient generation of stars.
Oh, think of that.
And wow, but wait a minute, that's what I learned in college doing my doctoral work, but those were my molecules, and suddenly it became not intellectual but personal. Mm-hmm. It became a visceral experience, and accompanied by an ecstasy, a wow. It was a personal connection. And I didn't know what that meant. I had no understanding of that whatsoever. But to jump ahead, it took me several months of research before I discovered in the ancient Sanskrit that experience was called samadhi. It was the situation where you see things in their separateness, but you experience them viscerally with bliss in their unity and their connection.
That's beautiful.
And so it was a pretty wow experience.
Yeah.
So it's so interesting that your science led you to the moon, and your science led you to a subjective experience that the ancients would describe maybe more in a mystical tradition.
Yes. As I continued my research, I got all excited by that after I got back. It was so profound that I couldn't let go of it. I had to go find out, what does this mean? What's going on up here? And that's when I started doing my research, and finally, I found nothing in the science literature.
Nothing?
Well, nothing about consciousness.
Okay.
Consciousness wasn't a subject appropriate for science, certainly not in those days. So I started digging into the mystical literature, not the religious literature, the mystical literature, pre-religious literature. And that's where I found it. Then that really aroused my curiosity, so I started looking in other traditions, other cultures too, other than the Hindu culture. And I eventually began to realize that every culture among their ancient people, the aboriginal people of whatever, their shamans, their medicine men, their mystics, or by whatever name, were reporting these similar types of connectedness with everything. In other words, the mystics of all traditions forever have been saying we're all interconnected in some mysterious way. Well, all of a sudden that was what we were experiencing.
They would have a similar experience, but would they describe it in a similar or different way?
Well, I think that is precisely one of the problems. If we want to call this experience an esoteric, transcendent experience, and we find that it's in all the literature or in the folklore of all traditions in their ancient literature, and largely handed down in oral traditions, that if we want to call that the esoteric, but let's call the explanation of it the exoteric, the external communication of the internal
experience.
And we find that those differ, not from the mystics themselves, but from the followers who haven't had the experience.
In terms of their understanding
through the words. In terms of their understanding and interpretation. So we say that I say that the esoteric is the foundation of religion, but it's the exoteric that becomes religion. And of course, they're all different, but they're based upon the same experience, same types of inner experiences.
I understand.
So just to jump back a minute to you're in the spacecraft and you've been taught the universe is a certain way. You're looking out and you perceive it in a new way. In the Newtonian universe, the mechanical universe, they use the analogy of a clock that works like a machine. When you saw that it was different and you felt this connectedness of you with the universe, the Newtonian universe is kind of a dead universe, dead matter, dead energy. Was your samadhi experience, did you see it in a...
I realized the conundrum here. That our science, based upon a Newtonian materialist deterministic concept, would say that consciousness, or how we perceive things, is an epiphenomenon, a byproduct of matter, of the accidental organization of matter. But in the ancient traditions, the oral traditions, they perceive that consciousness is the fundamental stuff, and matter descends from consciousness.
So it's just
so here we have two different concepts from the mystical and religious and the scientific. And in our modern time, it goes back to Descartes, where Descartes made the conclusion that body, mind, physicality, spirituality belong to two independent realms of reality. In terms of philosophy, it is that the primal cause is matter, but in terms of traditional religious, mystical experience, the primal cause is consciousness.
So it's a real dichotomy.
A real dichotomy. And so it occurred to me, even on the flight coming home, that humans forever have asked the questions, who are we? How do we get here? What's this all about? What's our relationship? That now that we were a spacefaring civilization, having been off our planet for the first time, that maybe we needed to re-ask that question in terms of more modern knowledge and launch a new investigation, more detailed, into how do you solve this problem of consciousness using the tools of science, but approaching the concepts of mysticism.
So Edgar, in this dichotomy, and so in the Newtonian physical world, and then in the Descartes I think, therefore I am in the subjective world. There's a science and a philosophy, and the Newton science was good enough to get you to the moon and back.
Isaac did that.
and it gets spacecraft to Mars so we can explore the planet. So there's a science to the old view that changed for you. Is there a science to your new understanding of the universe?
Yes. It has always been true that Newtonian science simply failed to, it didn't address inner experience and consciousness and mental phenomena.
Yeah.
That was a no-no. That was the other side of the street. But with the beginning of the 20th century, and Einstein's famous paper in 1905 began the real inquiry that suggested light had two characteristics, both particle and wave characteristic.
Mm-hmm.
And we later very quickly discovered that all matter at that level has wave and particle characteristic. And that was the beginning of quantum mechanics. Now, quantum mechanics has not really been applied to mind the stuff in all these years, and largely because that was a theological issue. But it turns out that if we use quantum mechanics to start to understand some of these mystical type issues, or I do not like the word, but parapsychological type issues, we make great progress.
Okay.
And that's what has happened here in the last 25 to 30 years.
Edgar, how would you define quantum?
Okay, a quantum merely means a little packet of something, an amount.
Okay.
And so light, for example, considered as photons, the smallest particle of light, which is based upon the energy content, it's called a quantum.
Okay.
And so the whole study of quantum mechanics is a study of small particles.
Okay, that makes it simple.
It makes it very simple. But what makes it different from Newtonian classical mechanics are several properties that are called entanglement, coherence, non-locality, and resonance. Now, you find resonance in classical mechanics, but you also have it in quantum mechanics. Now, let's define those terms.
Okay.
Entanglement means that if subatomic particles are ever in a process together and they go apart from the universe, from each other, they maintain a correlation so that if something happens to this one instantly reacts to it, or we say, quote, unquote, instantly knows what's happening.
And does it matter how far apart they are?
It does not matter, according to the best theory. It doesn't matter how far. They can go across the universe from each other.
Okay.
Have there been any tests?
Oh, yes. This entanglement, and non-locality is the description of the fact that they know instantaneously regardless of how far they are apart, which truly is an enigma for classical mechanics and general relativity and Einstein's special relativity. So here's a conundrum here. But it has been demonstrated, as far as we can reach out, that it's true, that non-locality is a property of nature at that level. And coherence, to use another word, coherence, it means that the light waveforms are together.
Okay.
In other words, I like to use the concept, it's the difference between combed hair and uncombed hair.
Well, that's a good way to think of it.
Everywhere. And light, we say polarized light, is coherent. The waveforms are all structured. So these are the properties of matter at this subatomic level. And for 80 years, we have been taught, and it's in the dogma, well, that's all very well and good, but it doesn't have anything to do with our scale size of things. It doesn't apply to us.
In the macro world.
In the macro world of reality. And as it turns out, that's dead wrong. It does apply to us.
Okay.
And the information from that world is available under certain conditions, and is generally available through a process of resonance. Now, we can think of resonance to get that idea across as if I pluck a violin string over here, and a similarly tuned violin string across the room starts to vibrate and make a sound, which we all know happens.
Yes.
That's resonance. So we see this as one of the four properties, fundamental properties at the quantum level, that are quite germane to our understanding, new understanding of these type of phenomena.
Does this new science, does it in any way help resolve that dichotomy that we were talking about between the outer objective and the inner subjective?
Well, it is precisely the way quantum mechanics was initially formulated, that knowing was what seemed to bring reality at that level into existence. That was one of the earliest interpretations, was that the interaction of mind and matter came together, and quantum mechanics started to formulate that in the sense that we can formulate things in such a way that they don't become real until they're known.
Right.
But it's still true that mind-matter comes together, and we can study some of these powerful aspects of bio-nature and mind and consciousness using quantum mechanics. For example, one can ask the question why we are told and taught that the primary chemicals in our body is carbon.
Okay.
So carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen and nitrogen are fundamental to the bioprocess. Well, one must ask then, what is the difference between the carbon, hydrogen, nitrogen, oxygen in this biomatter and that which you just find in inanimate nature?
Okay.
Well, it is because it is entangled, coherent, non-local, and its information flows by being resonant. So the body is
So they really all play into it.
It all plays together, and the ancient dogma that only pertains to subatomic matter is just dead wrong.
Okay.
We have shown in modern times.
It's really throughout nature.
All throughout nature,
Yeah.
that nature is interconnected in this way.
Yeah.
What do you think the best evidence is about that non-locality is real?
There have been hundreds and hundreds of experiments done with individuals in a shielded room that where electromagnetic signals cannot penetrate.
Okay.
But the most powerful experiments that have been done that way is if you hook two people who are simpatico up to EEG machines, but keep them separated from each other, and then tell one of them to think about the other, even though they're isolated electromagnetically, their brain waves go in sync. And so that is one of the more powerful bits of evidence.
And that would be kind of like a mother who knows her baby in another room is not all right, even though there's no sound.
That's right.
Is there a mechanism that accounts for this?
That is the great enigma that we still don't quite know how information propagates. Einstein's special relativity says that information, nor anything else for that matter, cannot be propagated faster than the speed of light. But non-locality says it's an instantaneous propagation.
You just said that earlier.
But we don't quite understand the mechanism. Now there's a lot of physics that goes into this. The primary issue is something called a zero-point energy field, which seems to be the propagator for this type of information. A zero-point energy field is an invention or a discovery, if you will, or a renaming in the 20th century of what used to be called the ether.
Okay.
That the ether was thought to pervade all space. And if light was a wave, what did it wave in?
Oh, yes.
So the ether was thought to be the substance in space that light waved in. But then the Michelson-Morley experiment in the late 1900s did an experiment that measured the speed of light in different parts of the Earth orbit and discovered it didn't matter, that the speed of light was the same regardless of where you measured it. And the natural conclusion of that there is no ether. Space is totally empty, because otherwise there would be a Doppler effect.
Okay.
It turns out that wasn't true. That was a wrong interpretation, that space isn't empty. It's filled with quantum fluctuations. And that's borne out by several different types of experiments and studies. So we now call that the zero-point energy field.
Okay.
And it means that the basic concept here is that we've known forever, since quantum mechanics, that matter, when in its natural state is emitting and reabsorbing energy continuously. And even if you take it down to absolute 0 degrees Kelvin, which it's supposed to be inert at that point, and even though matter changes properties, it still emits and reabsorbs energy at 0 degrees Kelvin.
Okay.
That's why it's called a zero-point energy field.
Okay.
And since space generally is at 0 degrees Kelvin, unless you capture some light beams, and it is presumed that the zero-point energy field pervades all space.
I've heard the term quantum hologram, and I've read it, and I'm not sure if it's physical, like an atom, or if you might define exactly what a quantum
Thank
hologram
you. That's an important question, Trish, and delighted to answer that. We spoke about matter emitting and reabsorbing energy continuously.
Yes.
Most of the 80 years of quantum mechanics, physicists have been concerned with individual particles and how they split and how they radiate and so on and so forth. But a colleague of mine in Germany, Dr. Walter Schempp, while working on MRI technology, trying to improve MRI machines, discovered a property called quantum holography. And basically what it is instead of studying individual emissions, you study them as a group phenomenon.
Okay.
And let me get that idea across pretty well. If you take a look at the ridges on your finger, you don't learn much if you just look at a single ridge and try to say, what does that tell me? But if you look at all 10 ridges and fingerprints as a group, it uniquely identifies you.
Yes, what a good way to understand that.
Well, the quantum hologram was a discovery that if you study the quantum photon emissions from any matter, it is carrying the information about the events in the life history of that piece of matter, whether that's this table, this book, you, me, or the trees here, or whatever. This is a wow discovery because it does a number of things. It elevates information in physics to the same level of importance as energy itself.
Oh my gosh.
When you say information, you mean?
Information, if we define it broadly, as just patterns of energy. So, the particular mathematical formalism that goes with the quantum holography is a group study. It also tells us this energy of this information is non-local, which means it's carried in the zero-point energy field.
I see.
And we can then start to say, we've heard the mystical tradition, for example, of the Akashic record. Well, this seems to be the mechanism that allows the Akashic record to take place. In other words, it is nature's memory system. And I've written a paper called The Quantum Hologram, Nature's Mind, to suggest this ubiquitous
that's fascinating.
application.
And the Akashic, just to make sure we're clear here, the Akashic record holds all information that has ever been?
That presumably is the way the ancient mystics defined it, and that is precisely what the quantum hologram suggests it's all about. It's a mechanism to carry the history of everything.
Of everything.
And it carries it out throughout nature. And the point is, it is recoverable through resonance.
Oh,
so
God.
When you're in barbecue mode and you realize that the same elements that compose you compose the stars and you came from a star, can the human being be in resonance with parts of nature?
That is exactly what happens. That's exactly how we get this information. It is exactly how the mother and the child get information between each other when they're apart or even close. They're resonating. We hear of athletic teams. They call it being in the zone.
Yes, absolutely.
But they're in resonance. They're all working with a resonant concept mentally of each other. And here is a mechanism that starts to explain it.
Okay,
but it goes further. It goes much further than that. It turns out that it causes us to alter our notion of how perception takes place at all.
Oh, really? Within ourselves?
Yeah.
Okay.
We call our intuition the sixth sense.
Right.
Should be called the first sense.
Is that
Because
right?
it's rooted in quantum phenomenon that came along well before there was any life on this planet, or this planet really even organized itself well. So we are looking here at one of the most fundamental perceptual mechanisms in nature.
Edgar, why do we call it the sixth sense when it's really out there in front?
Because you correctly asked the question some time ago, we can't, within classical physics, describe these things. They don't fit. They're been called nonsense, psychic stuff within classical physics, because there's no mechanism to describe it. But with quantum mechanics there is.
There is.
And the quantum holograph, there now is. But see, that's a development of the last, the quantum holograms, development of the last 12, 15 years, and understanding resonance and non-locality and entanglement has only been really validated in the last 20-some years.
And it takes the world much longer to catch up,
to get
doesn't
these
it?
ideas across.
So Edgar, you used some really fascinating terms, nature's mind, and now we have this zero-point field, and it seems that physical things come from the zero-point field. Are you also implying that consciousness may come from the zero-point field?
Consciousness is still the great enigma. It is not clear. For example, we know we're conscious,
Yes.
but we now know there's consciousness throughout nature.
Yes.
For example, consciousness is defined as being aware.
Okay.
You're conscious and you're aware.
Yes.
But it's also defined, our type of consciousness, Homo sapiens, as being aware of our awareness, or self-reflectively aware.
Yes, right.
So, those are two different definitions of consciousness, but related. If we go back to our basic quantum entanglement, where I said particles can go across the universe and react, and I said in parenthesis, they seem to know what happened to each other. Let's postulate, as I do, that is the most simple, fundamental act of perception in all of nature. Two particles interacting with each other and knowing what's happening to the other one.
Can self-aware conscious beings, can humans influence the physical world with their thought?
Of course. And that, of course, is the active side. Perception is the passive side, the incoming information. But it's long been thought and poo-pooed by modern science about the interaction of mind and matter in a proactive sense. But I've investigated that carefully. I've been subject to it. I've looked at some of the great psychics of this world who, without a doubt, and in a laboratory setting, can demonstrate mind over matter type phenomena.
I've seen that too.
With regard to psychokinesis, one of the more important applications of that, of course, is healing. And those are some of the first ones that I studied, was healing. More importantly, I have personally, after many years, been the subject of alternative methods of healing.
And how was that?
Well, it worked.
It worked.
Prostate cancer, kidney cancer, both clear, clinically confirmed. And so there is no question but what psychokinesis is real enough. The real question is how to model it within science, and that's one of the unanswered questions that we don't quite know how to do yet. But we're narrowing in on how to model this within science. What we can address at this point in time, because of the quantum hologram and the way nature interacts with itself through the quantum hologram, can come to a conclusion that we live in a universe that is intelligent, self-organizing, creating, learning, trial and error, participatory, interactive, non-locally interconnected evolutionary system.
Wow.
And you got to have all those words to describe the way it functions.
Boy, Edgar, that is so far from the Newtonian Cartesian
It's
universe.
very far from the Newtonian Cartesian ideas. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much.
Yes.
Thank
Thank you,
you.
Edgar.